Housekeepers of Reddit, what's the strangest thing you've seen rich people do behind closed doors? Story 1. When you work in housekeeping for the ultra-rich, things involving debauchery, substance, or just general grossness stop being all that surprising after a while. But my favorite story is the time I had to bring in a witness to open a room safe that a guest had left locked. What was inside? A single Taco Bell bean burrito. Best guess, a very drunk guest mistook the safe for the microwave. Before we continue, do us a quick favor, smash that like button and subscribe to support our channel. Story 2. My sister works as a nanny for an NBA player and his wife. One night at around 9 p.m., the wife called my sister to come over for an urgent matter. When my sister arrived, the wife simply asked her to take out the trash. That was it. She drove an hour-round trip just for that. My sister has plenty of ridiculous stories about this family, but that one is my favorite to share. Edit. My sister signed an NDA, so I can't share his name unless I want legal trouble. I'll just say he's in his 20s and seems like a decent guy. His wife, on the other hand, comes across as extremely entitled and unpleasant. Story 3. Dog walker here. One of my regular clients is this very wealthy woman who absolutely adores her little Pomeranian, like treats him better than most people treat their kids. Anyway, one day I was filling up his water bowl from the sink before our walk and she literally gasped like I had just dumped bleach in it. She rushed over and dumped it out, then very calmly explained that he only drinks smartwater. Story 4. The daughter of my ultra-rich boss was 19 and had gotten married, so the couple decided to have a test child that was actually a small monkey. That was already pretty strange, but then I learned they'd had a previous monkey before that. The first one had been playing in the laundry while the maid was loading the washer, and it didn't survive. Makes me wonder why they didn't reconsider the whole test child experiment after that first tragedy. Story 5. I worked for a beverage distribution company in a very ritzy resort area for a while. One day, a guy's assistant shows up and says he needs a pallet of Evian for his boss's house. No problem. We load it onto the truck and drive it up. After unloading, we ask where he wants it, and he leads us into the garage and asks for help carrying it inside. We start down stacking and carrying cases, thinking we're headed to the kitchen or pantry. Nope, straight through the house to the back deck. He was filling his hot tub with Evian. Story 6. I used to work room service at a mid-range hotel, and one of the funniest things I ever saw was during a champagne and chocolate-covered strawberries delivery for a honeymoon package. This one was requested to be set up before the guests arrived. The second I walked into the room, I could tell I wasn't the first person to have been in there. Someone had already tossed rose petals around and added some decorations to set the mood. But the thing that really stood out was a 3x3 printout of the bride's father. Massive cheesy grin, thumbs up, and all taped to the ceiling directly above the bed. Another thing I always found odd, high school and college-aged guys would just hang out in each other's rooms without a stitch of clothing. They'd answer the door with zero shame, chat with me like nothing was out of the ordinary, and carry on as if it were totally normal. At first I thought they were doing it for laughs to see if I'd react, but it happened so often I realized it wasn't a joke. People are just strange. Story 7. I used to work as a housekeeper for a very wealthy family, and honestly, they had a whole menu of strange habits. One day, the wife was driving through the home improvement district, saw a bathtub sale, and just bought 3. No reason, no reno planned. As she was leaving, she saw another one she liked and grabbed that too. 4 tubs in one day, sitting in storage, never used. They refused to throw away food. Doesn't matter if it's years past date. I once found a can of seafood marinara that expired 15 years earlier. They just shrugged and put it back in the cupboard. They own a holiday home in the South Pacific. Gorgeous place, but they only visit 3-4 times a year. Despite that, They pay me to arrange cleaners to come through 3 times a week. Most of the time, the house is spotless and empty, waiting for no one. When they go out to dinner, the dad will happily drop a fortune on everyone's meals, but he refuses to pay for the drinks. Doesn't matter if it's just a Coke, the kids, all teens or older, have to reimburse him, and he actually sends little reminder messages afterward about how much they owe. But if one of the kids offers to cover the whole meal, he won't allow it. The wife is a hoarder of samples, hotel shampoos, soaps, cosmetics, free handouts. If she sees a housekeeping trolley in a hotel hallway, she'll raid it like it's Halloween. They have an entire bathroom cabinet filled with hundreds of tiny bottles and packets, none of which she actually uses. Story 8. My mother owns a cleaning company and has come across all kinds of strange things, most of them the usual you'd expect, but the worst thing she ever found was a dead body. She only told me this story once, and that was enough. She had a client, an older man, probably around 65 or 70, whose house she cleaned every 2 weeks. He wasn't so old that you'd expect him to pass away soon. Normally he was home, so she'd knock first before using her key. This time, his dog started barking like crazy, much more than usual. She waited, thinking the barking would get his attention, but nobody came. Worried something might be wrong, she looked through the windows and saw a leg sticking out from behind the sofa. At first, she thought he might have fallen and hurt himself, maybe a broken hip. She scrambled through her keys, finally got the door open, and immediately smelled the unmistakable stench of death. He had been gone for a while. The dog was standing guard over him, refusing to let anyone near, and was so thin it was clear he hadn't eaten properly in days. It was heartbreaking. Story 9. I know a woman who's quietly wealthy, the kind of rich where, unless you recognize the more understated luxury brands, you'd never realize it. She even wore designer jewelry sets to the gym. Her little quirk was Costa coffee. She sips by one, drink half, let the rest cool, then stick it in the fridge and reheat it the next day. When she told us about this habit and we asked her why, she just laughed and said, "I sip them just frugal." Story 10. I nannied for a New York City power couple back in 2014. Both were corporate lawyers at major national banks. The husband owned more socks than I had ever seen in one place. Drawers upon drawers, all navy, black and gray. Story 11. I used to date a very wealthy guy. Nothing was ever out of reach for him, and he was absolutely not used to being told no. The day I broke up with him was terrifying. We were in the car with his driver on a cold day, and the driver refused to give up his beanie. My ex lost it completely and pulled a gun on the guy because he wanted the beanie and couldn't understand why he couldn't just take it. Yeah, that was the day I realized some rich people are just straight up insane behind closed doors. Story 12. I used to be a live-in nanny for the CEO of a major German investment bank in Berlin. They were a lovely couple with a sweet baby girl and made me feel like part of the family from day one. They paid me well, provided a separate car for me, and didn't mind what I did in my spare time. They were genuinely generous and kind. My only gripe was their strange eating habits. Some days they'd have 3 enormous meals, and other days they'd forget to eat at all. I was often too shy to speak up when I was hungry. Story 13. I've only babysat once, and it was for a friend of my grandparents. All I had to do was hang out with their 8-year-old grandson for the night. Honestly, it was a pretty cool night. We just played 2K and Madden the whole time, so it wasn't bad. This family wasn't billionaire-level wealthy, but they were definitely well off. They left me an envelope with $500 and told me I could keep whatever I didn't spend on food. Wealthy enough to speed off in a Maserati for dinner, wealthy enough to have a pool, jacuzzi, and a nice built-in BBQ in the backyard. You get the idea. I figured I might as well splurge $30, $40 on a meal for the 2 of us, and pocket the rest. I was 17 or 18 at the time, so that was a non-negligible amount of money. At one point, I took the kid outside to my car across the street, my older brother's 2005 Toyota Corolla. He got in, looked around, and said, "Where's the button that moves the roof back?" "Sorry, kid, not a convertible." He then explained that his parents only drove convertibles and that he'd only been in one other non-convertible. He jokingly told me, "I'm not your friend anymore." Throughout the night, he made some interesting rich kid comments like asking if we could go to a restaurant that served steak. He also shared a bit about his parents. Apparently, they were always talking about bringing him a sister when the time is right. When he asked his dad when that would be, the dad said, "When mommy stops being afraid." I later found out his parents divorced about a year after that. Felt bad because he was a cool kid. He didn't have that spoiled vibe, more like an innocent, curious kid who had just been steered wrong by his parents. Story 14. My friend works for a tax lawyer who handles the obscenely wealthy. Their firm is one of those go-to places if you want to take advantage of tax havens. Think Panama, Luxembourg. He told me about one client who ran into a crisis and immediately called the people he always relies on, his lawyers. The problem: he had just bought a new jet and realized its entertainment system didn't have a Blu-ray player. This was 5 years ago. He needed someone to fix it today. So, he had lawyers at 3 different firms scrambling to find a solution that afternoon, and of course, they all billed him for it. Story 15. Once when I was house-sitting while the family was out of the country, my refrigerator at home had broken, so I packed up some perishables and brought them to the family's house to store until my landlord could fix it. When I brought my groceries back to my apartment, I realized I had accidentally grabbed something that wasn't mine from the cheese drawer. It was a gallon-sized Ziploc bag. Inside that was a smaller Ziploc. Inside that was a bundle of wax paper. Inside that was a bundle of plastic wrap. Then another bundle of plastic wrap. Then a bundle of tin foil. 7 layers deep. I finally uncovered an old lump of fruitcake. Story 16. I once babysat for a wealthy family. Their silverware was constantly filthy, caked in what looked like peanut butter and regret. The children were pleasant, but refused to brush their teeth any more often than their hygiene-challenged parents, until I started telling them gross stories about gingivitis. The mom had a small Buddhist altar in the living room, but was also extremely vocal about her Christianity. Would repeat the experience. Most of the time, I was just getting paid to help with homework and watch Voltron in pillow forts. Story 17. I was a nanny for an affluent family. They had a beautiful home, nice cars, and the kids had plenty of toys and new clothes. One day, while doing laundry, I had to take a load of the mom's clothes out of the dryer, and every single pair of her underwear had multiple holes in them. Not accidental snags, but worn out, tattered beyond belief. Curious, I looked in her drawer, and it was the same story across the board, not just old or period-related underwear. She was a high-ranking executive at a major company, and her underwear looked, well, worse than I would have ever expected. Story 18. I've completely forgotten how they got their start in life. I used to work for a guy who ran multiple businesses into the ground and declared bankruptcy more than once, if I remember correctly. Then he married a wealthy woman, and she paid for him to get a decent professional certification. He now owns a business that's slowly failing due to how he runs it, but he and his wife still have plenty of family money, and they're well respected in the community. He constantly complains about lazy millennials who are entitled and think they deserve free stuff from the government. It drove me crazy. He was so dependent on luck and the generosity of others early on, yet he acted as if he was morally superior to anyone trying to get a leg up. Story 19. I work at a ski school office at a fancy resort in Colorado. I've had guests book a private instructor just for themselves for 3 weeks straight at $1,000 a day, only to throw a massive fit when their credit card gets declined for a $20,000 charge. Trying to explain that the card company might think it's fraud, total meltdown. I have a $200,000 limit. It shouldn't debt decline. Story 20. I once helped my mother-in-law, who worked as a maid, at a very large mansion in North Carolina. The house was beautiful, with incredible architecture, and the family traveled the world constantly. But inside, things were strange. The kitchen had appliances from the 1970s, and the wife's bathroom had a broken toilet seat duct taped together. She never re-wore her underwear. We weren't allowed in the basement, but I peeked. Clothes were piled 3 feet deep. She would take off her clothes and just toss them down there. Thousands of pairs of underwear. Very weird people. Story 21. I'm an assistant to a rich guy, helping him run his business. Most of the wealthy people I know are extremely entitled. They don't understand the word no. I have no idea how some of them got rich. My boss once had a full-blown temper tantrum because a customer called him 40 minutes before he was leaving for vacation. He barely does anything, goes on vacation at least once a month, and regularly screws over customers. One day, we ordered a burger, and it came on a sesame seed bun. He doesn't like sesame seeds, so he threw the burger at the cook and completely lost it. He constantly complains about how hard his life is, even though he can buy anything and go anywhere he wants. Money and greed really screw people up. Once he's back from his summer in LA, I'm looking for something new. I just don't care anymore. Story 22. The most bizarre family I ever worked for was a newly rich young family in Vienna. The bedtime routine for their kids, ages 3 and 7, was basically a full spa treatment. I've never seen that many products in a child's bathroom in my life. Each kid had their own. The poor 7-year-old girl had almost no hair, yet every night I was required to slather her in the most expensive adult shampoo, conditioner, hair mask, hair oil, and a few other things I didn't even recognize. They only had a tiny box of toys, and playtime was strictly 30 minutes after brushing teeth. Dinner was typically a bland fish fillet and a huge salad, not a grain of sugar anywhere in the house. Even hot cocoa was made with skim milk and pure, unsweetened, high-quality cocoa. It tasted terrible. The parents had time to explain everything to me on my first day, and I even received an inch-thick file with lists and procedures to follow. What they didn't mention, the older girl still wore diapers at night. That made for a very awkward conversation, and I only hope I handled it sensitively enough not to cause her any future trauma. Very, very weird. Story 23. During the summer while I was on vacation from college, I helped my mom at her first landscaping's greenhouse job. We went to this particular lady's house in the rich part of town, a huge antebellum home. She was a realtor and all that jazz. We called her Dragon Lady because she looked like a wrinkly old dragon, and she hoarded the most ridiculous jewelry and always wore it, even in her pajamas. We were there to redo her backyard, replace nice shrubs and flowers she'd just grown tired of. She was the worst kind of person, mean-spirited, snide, the works. But she always had a parade of young men coming and going. If we ever ran into one, she introduced them as her cousins, and we just rolled our eyes. She would flounce around in sheer robes, and the guys would parade behind her. She seemed to want us to see it, always in the sunroom, being doted on, getting lotion rubbed into her reptilian-looking skin, drinks, food, the whole works. Then, when she was done with them, a slick Mercedes would pull up and pick them up. We only saw the car a couple times, but wow, she was strange, and honestly, pretty gross. She was a relic even back then, and that was only about 7 years ago. She's probably a fossil by now. Story 24. I was a maid for a pretty affluent family for a summer, and overall they were really nice and great parents. 2 things stood out to me. First, one day they had family friends visiting with their 3 children. I ended up working a full day taking care of all 5 kids while the 4 adults just hung out in the house, ostensibly working from home, but really just drinking wine and socializing. I understand having a nanny around while parents are home occasionally makes sense, but nannying 5 kids while their parents were literally 10 feet away felt a little absurd. Second, they reused Ziploc bags. Honestly, I probably spent at least 45 minutes a day washing, drying, and organizing them. Story 25. I worked as a live-in nanny for a young, affluent couple and their 2 kids. The father was 28 and owned a record label for Mexican artists, easily making $4 million per year. The mother was 26 and famous on Instagram for flaunting their lavish lifestyle. They lived in a massive, self-designed hacienda-style house in the desert about 30 minutes outside the city. Each bedroom had its own walk-in closet, ensuite bathroom, and access to a wraparound balcony overlooking the courtyard. The house had glass elevators, an indoor koi pond in the entryway, a courtyard stage for live music at parties, and a covered sitting area big enough for 30 tables. Their kitchen had a walk-in refrigerator and enough ovens and stoves to run a restaurant. On the roof, there was a helipad, and the father owned 4 helicopters. Cars included a Maserati, 2 Ferraris, one for him, one for his wife, and a rose gold Range Rover. Parties happened every weekend. Not small dinner parties, these were 200, 300-person get-so-drunk-you-can't-stand affairs, with live banda music so loud you couldn't hear yourself think. Men were taking strange pills, women screamed and laughed while bouncing babies on their knees, and the chaos was constant. At one party, the father raced guests in his Ferrari behind the house. It flipped, but he was fine, just angry about the damage. At another, guests jumped from the second-story balcony into the courtyard pool's fountain. One broke his foot. My job at every party was to watch the kids, give them juice, supervise play, tuck them in when things got too wild. The parents fought every weekend. Usually the mother was upset about his reckless behavior, while he insisted he was fine. She'd go to bed mad, he'd stay up until 6 a.m., then everything would reset the next day. The mother was beautiful, mostly sweet but airheaded, and very attached to her family. She loved drama, had a private makeup artist, and shopped extravagantly, spending $5K or more every couple of weeks. The father, on the other hand, was reckless and selfish, obsessed with partying, showing off, and taking risks, assuming money could fix any problem. The household was staffed extravagantly. 2 cooks, 3 housekeepers, personal assistants for both parents, a planner for parties and vacations, 4 security guards, and me as the nanny. Security was tight, intricate locks, cameras, and armed guards patrolling constantly. I worked for them about 2.5 years. The kids were young, under 6, and surprisingly well-behaved, so my job was manageable. Watching everything else unfold was like a front-row seat to a real-life soap opera. Eventually, the security measures proved necessary. The house was raided by police twice on suspicion of drug activity, nothing was found, and they received death threats from men trying to break in. I quit after the death threats, fearing for my own safety. I felt awful for the kids, who were growing up in an environment that was exciting and chaotic, but also dangerous. Story 26. My dad is an electrician and has worked in some very wealthy homes. He once did a job for a couple who only drank extremely fancy, freshly made coffee. Fair enough, who wouldn't? But here's the kicker. Their cleaner was allowed exactly 1 cup of coffee per day, and it couldn't be their coffee. She had her own separate coffee, which wasn't even a decent brand. It was the absolute cheapest stuff you could buy, like Asda Smart Price Instant or something. If someone comes to my flat, friend, plumber, whoever, they're a guest, and they drink whatever tea or coffee I'm drinking, to me, they're equals. My dad says some of the stingiest people he's known are also the wealthiest. Story 27. I once worked for a very rich family. The family that regularly bought complicated Lego sets for their 5-year-old and then assembled them for him because they were too complicated for a 5-year-old, while he complained they weren't going fast enough, still receive periodic installments of my pity and contempt. Like, dude, he's not learning anything except that mommy and daddy exist solely to serve him. The toys aren't teaching him anything. Oh, and they also bought him new toys almost every week. I can set with some parents. Story 28. This wasn't really behind closed doors or anything, but I once delivered furniture to a very wealthy person's mega house. As we were going from room to room, I noticed a few rooms were completely bare. At first, I didn't think much of it. I assumed we'd be putting furniture in there with the load we were delivering. But that didn't happen. I mentioned to a coworker that one of the rooms was bigger than my entire living room and completely empty. He said, "Maybe they sift your getting stuff during another round?" The homeowner overheard and said, "Nah, that room is staying empty. I have no use for it. Same with the others too." I couldn't wrap my head around it. First, being rich enough to afford a house like that, and then purposefully leaving parts of it unused because you just don't care about them. Why even buy a house that big? Why overdo it and leave some of it empty? Why not just buy what you need and use it all? Rich people are weird. Story 29. There was a serious lack of showering on the father's part. He worked from home about 95% of the time, and his office stank. They also had absolutely no idea that I lived a 50-minute drive away without traffic, up to 2 hours if there was a wreck in a town they had lived in all their lives. I lived on a base, so it wasn't some remote location. They only realized about a month before I moved away and were shocked at how far I drove. Nearly 13 hours a day for less than minimum wage. No clue. But they loved their kids, and so did I. So what's there to complain about? ETA, they were actually good employers, just clueless. I was young and didn't really know my worth. When I left, they were extremely sad to see me go. They had given me some high-ticket items after a few months, including a plane ticket for my personal use. A few months after I left, they admitted they hadn't realized how awesome I was. Quirky, yes, but not terrible. Story 30. When I was in my late teens, I babysat for my uncle and aunt's children. A bit of context, both our families came from basically nothing. My parents' uncle and aunt all worked their asses off in their 20s and 30s to get to where they are. My uncle ended up with the more lucrative business. My parents also wanted to make sure my sisters and I didn't grow up entitled, so if we wanted anything that didn't directly relate to our education or well-being, we had to pay for it ourselves. By the time we were 13, we were all employed by the family business. What I learned while babysitting my cousins was that they experienced the complete opposite. They got whatever they wanted whenever they wanted. It was surreal interacting with kids who casually showed off toys, phones, watches, and other extravagant items their parents had bought them on a whim, who randomly spends thousands of dollars on ultimately useless things for their kids, and does it regularly. As a result, 2 out of 3 of my cousins grew up to be self-entitled a-holes. Story 31. The family I worked for had a nanny. Their youngest daughter would force her nanny to push her around the entire property while she just hit high C notes. The property was hundreds of acres, and they kept at it for quite a while. The breadwinner is the husband, can say what he does, but he was a menace to the trees. He sept to need work breaks, grab a pole saw, and go to town on random trees. Then he sept get bored and tell me to clear the piles he sept made and pretty the trees back up. This was all on their 365-acre weekend property, complete with dam-generated power that took them off-grid. They also had a mansion in the big city and a cottage in cottage country. Talk about a life of excess. Story 32. I've been in a few really wealthy people's houses that had fires. One was a semi-famous boxer with 2 world championship belts, which he had sitting on his kitchen table. The weird part? The house was covered in pictures of him, not with his kids or wife, just of himself. Strange vibe. Another couple completely lost it because their kid allowed smoke to get into his trombone case. Not sure how he was supposed to prevent that, but okay. They also freaked out when the insurance company wouldn't pay for brand new handmade cabinets imported from Italy. One family lived in the middle of nowhere in a huge house. Every bedroom had a walk-in closet and bathroom suite, and there was even a hot tub room. But the guy was obsessed with his four-wheeler. He had an attached garage built specifically for it, and it was the only thing allowed in the garage. Story 33. Technically, it all happened behind the garage door. A neighbor won the lottery. Not a huge amount, but enough to live very comfortably. He took the lump sum and upgraded his little ranch with a massive garage, an in-ground pool, and a cabana. Before that, nobody ever hung out there, but afterward, he suddenly had so many friends. One of the first things he bought was his dream car, a red Lamborghini. One summer day, during a party, his friends wanted to see the car in action. He started it up in the garage and was revving it when it caught fire. The flames spread and burned the house to the ground, taking half his cash winnings stored in duffel bags with it. It turned out he didn't have insurance. He ended up using the rest of his winnings to rebuild his old house, but lost everything. Somehow, he managed to push the Lambo out of the garage, and to this day there's a half-burnt Lamborghini under a tarp in his backyard, 20 years later. Story 34. I'm a male, and when I was about 14, I used to babysit for families on my street. I learned that male babysitters were a hot commodity for parents of boys. I'd play sports and video games with them. Not that female babysitters couldn't, but they tended not to. One family had 2 boys and were pretty well off. Big house, 2 nice cars. The parents literally bought these kids every toy imaginable. Their basement rec room looked like a Toys R Us, half of it opened, half still in boxes. On my first day, I discovered the Lego, tons of it, almost all unopened. I asked the boys why they hadn't played with it yet, and they shrugged. We kinda just haven't gotten around to it. Judging by the mountain of toys, I believed them. I said, "Well, we're going to play the heck out of this Lego today." I didn't actually swear. We cleared off some space on the coffee table, dumped out every box, tossed the instructions aside, and built the biggest space station 40-odd Lego sets could make. I even came back a few days when I wasn't working just to build and play Lego with the boys. They had a ton of fun and became Lego maniacs like me. Story 35. I worked as a live-in groundskeeper for a wealthy eccentric for a while. He had 3 cars from old movies in his garage, one even from a James Bond film. They were covered in layers of dust and trash. One of them was a convertible with the top caved in under debris. Awesome cars, completely neglected and forgotten. He also had a favorite dog, kept frozen in a meat cooler, surrounded by decade-old frozen food. I know this because the garage was where my equipment was. I only saw the inside of the main house once. It was full of crystal, pewter, and silver tableware and decorative items, easily hundreds of thousands of dollars, just lying around in piles like something out of a pirate movie. He was rarely there anyway. Once every 3 months, he'd swing by to pay bills and take care of other business, then go back to France where he lived with his wife. A lesser man than me could have made off like a bandit taking things here and there. He wouldn't have noticed. I just did my job and improved the property because the guy before me was a lazy stoner. I was a stoner too, but the busybody kind. Story 36. I worked as a mobile dog groomer and once went to an older rock star's house to groom his dog. He was never home, but his wife always was. She wanted me to drive my fully equipped mobile grooming van, complete with tub, shampoos, dryers, and AC, 30 miles to her house, get out and go inside wearing those hospital-style glove booties on my feet. I had to use their shampoo, just human shampoo from Whole Foods, their hair dryer, but only on low, never hot, and their brushes and combs, which were human tools and didn't work on the dog. I washed the dog in her sink. While I worked, she would wander the house with her housekeeper, cleaning and reorganizing an already clean home, obsessing over the same 10 bookshelves. She would sneak up behind me to watch me groom the dog, who was just standing there while I spent an hour with a hairdryer trying to dry it. I wasn't allowed to touch the dog's toys. If it brought me one, I had to ignore it. The dog was being overwashed, which was causing most of its skin issues. They blamed allergies and replaced their backyard grass with fake grass. When I was done, I would wipe everything down, wait at the door, and she would write me a check for $40, no tip, and then talk to me for about an hour. The best day ever was when she left for the airport. She told me, "Just ask the maid for permission when you're done," and left. 10 minutes later, the maid wandered in. "She's gone for a month. I'm going home. Lock the door. Bye." I took the dog back to my van, actually groomed it in about 20 minutes, and then wandered around the house. I saw original artwork for some of his albums, used his toilet, and peeked in the medicine cabinet, which made me think he'd had a stroke, judging by the meds. Otherwise, the house was kind of empty and sad, with only a few family photos. I tried to fire her as a client, but the owners were starstruck and insisted on me grooming the dog. When I finally quit, the rock star's wife had a massive blow-up. She wrote the owners a check in advance for the next 2 months of grooming, told them not to cash it until a certain date, and then canceled it before they could. She was clearly mentally unwell, and years of money and fame had ruined any chances of her getting help. Mostly, I just felt bad for the dog, who was overwashed and dealing with the consequences of their obsession. Story 37. I used to work for a very wealthy woman taking care of her parents. The lady herself was incredibly kind and had 5 kids. Her kids, surprisingly, barely had any toys, and their beds didn't even have sheets. One of the boys played with a small collection of pennies and bullet casings as if they were toy soldiers. One of the girls had a dollhouse but no dolls, so she used billiard balls from the pool table as stand-in dolls. Story 38. I was a nanny for about 6 months. The mom had a serious drinking problem and often came home drunk from nights out with friends. One night, I stepped onto the back porch to take a call while the kid was sleeping and didn't realize the door would automatically lock behind me. I called her repeatedly to tell her I was locked out with her child inside. She didn't answer, but I remembered she had introduced me to a neighbor who supposedly had a key. Turned out he didn't, but he knew someone who did, and they let me back in. When she came home, reeking of tequila, she told me I either had to break up with my boyfriend and move in with her, or I couldn't work for her anymore, then fired me. When I explained I'd locked myself out, she started cracking up. She even called the next morning apologizing and begging me to work for her again. Apparently, I was also her personal chauffeur after she had plastic surgery, and she once rented me out to a friend for a Halloween party, $80 to watch 10+ kids for 4 hours. On the bright side, she had too much to drink, so I got to drive her new BMW home, probably the first and last time I'll drive a BMW. I eventually stopped working for her because I had to move across the state, though she texted 5 months later asking me to do an overnight while she went on a business trip. The cost in gas and food would have outweighed the pay, and I had a new job anyway. Speaking of overnights, when I was first hired, she told me I'd need to do them occasionally when she traveled to Chicago. She said I could just sleep in her bed with her daughter. Strange, considering she didn't really know me, but I did it anyway because the kid was used to it. She was a kicker and total blanket hog. Needless to say, a lot happened in those 6 months, and there's a reason I was never a nanny again. Story 39. I was a nanny for a wealthy family with 3 kids, coming in every Saturday. The parents explained how they did things, starting with speaking only in French to the kids. I thought that was cool, a good way to teach them a second language, but it wasn't so great when the kids would get up and talk to their mom in French, half the time complaining about me, and I had no clue what they were saying. I was also told never to use the words no or can't. If I had to tell the kids they couldn't do something, it had to be phrased with a positive spin. These three kids all wanted to do completely opposite things at the same time, so I had to find a happy, positive way to manage it without ever saying no. One wanted to stand on the brand new pool table, while another wanted to play with the stapler. Good luck. Consequences were non-existent in their little lives. The little girl once wanted Cheerios and a block of Parmesan cheese for lunch. I suggested mac and cheese instead, but the mom insisted she could have whatever she wanted. The girl would take a bite of the cheese, throw a Cheerio on the floor, and grin at me, knowing I'd have to clean it up. The more I swept, the more she did it. The parents would invite me over so they could go bike 100+ miles on Saturdays. I get it. They worked all week and had nannies and housekeepers, but they didn't want to spend time with Johnny, Susie, and little Tim. They didn't allow TV, except on rare occasions, and then only silent movies or old French films. They were also potty training their 9-month-old, yes, 9 months. I was expected to run after him when he peed and hold him over the toilet. He didn't wear diapers, peeing on anything he could and pooping on the floor frequently. The household was truly an eye-opener. I had never seen such odd people. They even accused the maid of stealing a cup for 5 hours and had a huge fight about it, only to find it later in the dishwasher. Pathetic. Story 40. I have a friend who is an artist specializing in fresco murals. For those who don't know, a fresco mural is painted directly onto wet plaster. It's delicate, meticulous work and has to be completed quickly because once the plaster dries, you have to start over from scratch. My friend was working on one such mural in the home of a wealthy couple. The couple didn't want any of the workers to know who they were, but they would occasionally drop by to check on progress. Each time they visited, they insisted that none of the help be in the same room as them. This meant my friend had to stop working, leave the room, and then start over from scratch once they were gone. Each visit ended up costing $30,000. The couple knew this, but still insisted on absolute privacy. By the end of the project, the mural had cost roughly $200,000. Story 41. I didn't work for him, but I dated a girl who was best friends with his mistress. When the wife was out of town, he'd throw a dinner party at a local restaurant for an eclectic mix of people he found entertaining. Guests included a priest, a lesbian couple, the owner of an oil change franchise, a general from the local Air Force base, a banker, and a young couple starting a swimming pool company. At the dinner, everyone was expected to tell a joke between each course. The priest had the best jokes, probably because it was so unexpected to hear a man in clerical attire telling such blue humor. After the party, my girlfriend, the host, and his mistress went back to his house, which was incredible. One thing I noticed, if he liked something, he would buy a case of it, or one in every color. He was very generous. Before I left, he gave me a bottle of wine and a collector's cup from the year the Texas Aggies won their conference in the 1960s. He was surprisingly down-to-earth in one-on-one conversation. Looking back, I think of that evening as one of the most interesting I've ever experienced. Story 42. I worked for a billionaire family. The missus could no longer have children biologically and had used donor eggs for her youngest. One day, she cornered me and said, "I've always wanted Eurasian children. I think they're the most beautiful people." She went on and on about wanting them and considering egg donors. I'm Asian American and the house had a staff of 20+ people. I have no idea why she felt the need to corner me for this. It was easily one of the most uncomfortable 15 minutes of my life. In her spare time, which was essentially all the time, she studied many subjects, including gemology. On a trip to some poor country rich in gems and minerals, she decided to go shopping. The gems would have been a fraction of retail price. The mister gave her a budget of $50K. She immediately told him she didn't go to gemology school for just $50K. He promptly increased her budget to $120K. $8,000 spent on a single order of solid white playtime t-shirts for her toddlers. That said, the family did compensate their staff very well. I received a good salary, medical/vision/dental insurance, a 401K, and a clothing allowance in case I needed anything for work. Story 43. My mother cleaned houses for wealthy people on the side quite often. One of her clients was a hardcore Christian, but their big secret? A false bookcase that led into a hidden den. Inside, there was an Xbox 360, a big rear projection TV, some non-Christian books, and even a little blow-up pool filled with beach balls. There was also some really psychedelic stuff and a collection of records. She couldn't stop laughing because the man, who was a doctor and worked with some highly respected colleagues, swore up and down that he was above all that nonsense, yet had this secret den full of things considered sinful by his own standards. My mom, who was also a Christian, found it hilarious and said it was actually tame compared to some of the other things she's seen. Story 44. I was an au pair for a British-Spanish couple in London. They raised their daughter, Helena, trilingual, even sending her to a German school. But because that school finished 2-3 hours earlier than typical British schools, the mum decided it was fine to make Helena study at home. Each day, I had to document Helena's performance on a long list of tasks: German reading, German writing, English reading, English reading, guitar, exercise, lunch, what she ate and how she behaved, playtime. Once I finished all of this, it was bedtime and the mum would make Helena read in Spanish. Weekends were packed with acting classes, ballet, and more. The parents planned to send her to a private school in Germany within a year or two, and the mum claimed she planned for Helena to go to Oxford University. Helena was rarely allowed to visit friends, and playdates were limited to a few hours on Fridays. Despite living in Putney, just a bus ride away from London's famous museums, she was not allowed on public transport. The worst part, the parents wouldn't acknowledge Helena until she completed all her tasks. Several times, the mum worked from home and, no exaggeration, pushed Helena away if she wanted a hug, simply because they were in the middle of a task. One day, the mum even asked me to teach Helena how to write essays. She was 7 years old. Helena struggled to integrate at school. Being almost the only non-German pupil, she became so attached to anyone who gave her attention, including me, that I sometimes had to tell her off or involve her parents. She would even follow me to the bathroom like a puppy until I managed to get her to let go. It was a complete freak show. I lasted 4 months before I quit. Helena had a big mental breakdown when she saw her mum at home and wasn't acknowledged. I went up to the mum's office, told her I was done, and called my previous all-pair mentor, who picked me up within 3 hours. That mentor is still a close friend, 10 years later. Helena should be 18 now, and I still wonder how she turned out. Story 45. My sister is married to an anesthesiologist who makes big bucks. They once spent $22,000 on an 8-kitsage 11-minute painting, basically the size of a piece of paper that looks like something a 3-year-old painted. Yet, when we visit my sister, she serves us meatballs she bought at Dollar Tree, where everything costs $1. She won't buy hand soap for the bathroom, instead putting a few chunks of old bar soap into a bottle and adding water. For her husband's birthday, she once bought him used silk boxers at a garage sale for 25 cents and gave him nothing else. Meanwhile, they own a $1 million vacation home and over $1 million worth of artwork. She doesn't care about how the house looks. The home is completely void of decoration. The picture frames don't even have family photos, they just have the generic images that come with the frame. She also buys way too much food, and when it goes bad, she returns it to the grocery store for a refund. It's just bizarre. Story 46. Not a domestic worker, but I used to do a lot of hospitality work in very high-end hotels. Rich people get up to the weirdest stuff, especially when it isn't their own home. Once, I served a full 3-course meal for 2 tiny dogs. Absolutely ridiculous. I was this close to telling them what I thought, but I needed to keep my job. On the bright side, I did get a nice tip out of it. When I worked as a valet driver, I frequently picked up guests who were blatantly high on something, talking nonsense, and generally a mess. One guy I found in the parking lot was completely naked except for Doc Martens, holding the keys to his luxury sports car. I managed to talk him down, sneak him back up to his room, and make him hot chocolate before getting him into bed. Saw him the next day, and he couldn't look me in the eye. My favorite story was dropping off luggage for a guest. Hotel policy was never to let the guest lift a finger. I knock. A red-faced, sweaty man opens the door a crack and whispers, "What do you want?" I hear a woman shouting, "Just tell them to go away." After explaining myself, the guy tells me to wait, shuts the door, then opens it again. I walk in with my cold weather gear and boots, dump the luggage in the corner, and notice the woman holding a sheet to cover herself. On the dressing table was a mountain of what I later presumed to be powder. I left with a smug grin and a hastily unrolled note in my pocket. Story 47. I was a former au pair working in Europe for a family of 5 with kids aged 9–13. My main responsibilities were driving them to activities, helping with studies, cooking dinner, and so on. The mess this family created was insane. In addition to having me as an au pair, they also employed a cleaning lady for several hours every weekday. At first I thought that was overkill, but stepping into the main house on weekends showed me why they needed so much help. In the kitchen, there would be garbage on the floor, fruit peels, eggshells, wrappers, and the sink would be overflowing with dishes. Dining room and coffee tables were covered with used dishes and food containers. And the bathroom, on more than one occasion, I saw menstrual blood wiped on the walls. I can only imagine how bad the bedrooms were. This was all what I encountered on a Saturday, less than 24 hours after the cleaning lady had been there. By Sunday, the house was a disaster zone. I felt so bad for the cleaning lady on Mondays that I would help her whenever my schedule allowed. If you had met them in public or visited on a day when the cleaning lady had just finished, you would never have known. I was lucky enough to live in a studio apartment in the backyard, which let me limit the time I spent in the main house outside of work hours. It's worth noting that both parents were medical professionals and very intelligent, but they didn't seem to care much about cleanliness at home at the time. After their kids started leaving for university, they got better about cleaning up after themselves, at least based on my visits back over the years. Despite the mess, they were a wonderful family to work for. Still, they are the second messiest people I've ever encountered in my life. Story 48. I used to work for a guy who would rant endlessly about the Tories and how they were ruining the country, quite rightly so, but then would have me order a 200-pound Smithson diary for him, fully aware that Smithson has strong financial links with the Conservatives. Not exactly behind closed doors, but he went out of his way to avoid the general public. If he had to attend a low-key event in London, just some networking, not a red carpet thing, I'd be told to order a Rolls-Royce with a chauffeur for £1, 700, so he could avoid a 45-minute train ride, or heaven forbid, a taxi where he might have to make small talk with someone who didn't know who he was. Once, we were driving in the Rolls, just having crossed into France via Calais. His son had binoculars and spent the ride observing the poor people. It was painfully obvious how privileged and emotionally disconnected from the world they were. It's a shame, because otherwise his son is a really pleasant, easygoing kid. Being rich changes the rules. If you check in at a Premier Inn and yell at the receptionist, smoke weed, or make ridiculous demands, you're likely to get asked to leave. But at the Ritz, pay enough, and they smile and say yes sir to just about anything. His life revolved around staying behind closed doors, avoiding anyone who might say no. Another oddity, he had 2 weekly cleaners and apparently didn't like what they were wearing. Rather than tell them directly, he ranted about their outfits to everyone else in the office before finally decreeing that they would now wear maids' outfits, corseted black silk dresses with a heavy canvas corset restricting movement, complete with a white apron and matching headpiece. Hooray for not working for him anymore. Story 49. A friend of mine came from a family that had made millions in real estate. Spoiler alert, they eventually lost it all. When I was in middle school, he invited me over to spend the night. My parents knew the family and made some oblique comments, but ultimately let me go. Their main house was huge, but single-story. Everyone had their own room. My friend had a space for entertaining, his sister had hers, and the parents had theirs. They mostly ate takeout and used golf carts to get around the paved roads of their sprawling property. It was kind of like a farm, though I'm not sure how functional it was. I think they had horses, but nobody rode them. Maybe an investment in racing? I grew up around horses, so that part didn't strike me as odd, just a little intimidating. We even visited some of the other houses they owned within the complex. Fully built single-family homes, completely empty. Overall, they were very nice people, but there was something a little off about them. They spent money freely but didn't seem to value nice things. A few visits later, my friend vanished from school. He went to a private school. Later, I learned that his family had lost everything and had to move into a mobile home. Last I heard, they'd bounced back and were doing okay. I might even be friends with him on Facebook now. Story 50. I worked for just over 2 years for a white-glove moving company in Seattle that catered almost exclusively to the state's 1%. Most of our jobs involved delivering, assembling, and installing high-end furniture and decor that interior designers had procured for clients. A few memorable stories. One move was for a certain Seattle supersonic sharpshooter from Yukon. His designer picked out a truly hideous rug for a room near the foyer and completely misjudged the dimensions. We had to reload it onto the truck and take it back. But just as we were about to leave, his wife came home and asked us to move their Cali King bed in the master bedroom. When we lifted the mattress, we stumbled upon their VHS porn collection, classic stuff. The wife laughed about it, and the husband, a total class act, gave us a tour of his man cave. It was insane, autographed memorabilia and photos with some of the most iconic figures of the 20th century. Great taste, and he tipped generously. Absolutely loved that job. Another job was for Mr. Starbucks himself. We were moving party furniture out of a large study for a weekend gathering. Inside, I saw one of the most incredible pieces of art I've ever seen, a roughly 12x18 black and white photo of the Twin Towers falling on 9/11, taken from a ground-level angle capturing a man running in the foreground as the smoke billowed behind him. Stunning. We moved the furniture to his garage, which also housed a Ferrari model unknown but covered. Not gonna lie, I really wanted to accidentally drop a chair on that car. The reason we had to undergo full background checks before even being assigned these jobs became clear after this one. Selling the Sonics months earlier apparently didn't make me any friends with the Starbucks guy. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you never miss an update.